GP MS4 training that was held not too long ago. A handful? Okay, so you may see some familiar slides here, but for those of you who haven't, this will be some fresh stuff. So what I'm going to talk a little bit today about is retrofit types and locations. So earlier today we heard a lot about designing bioretention, looking at how do we inspect bioretentions. This is kind of taking a step back to perhaps where you are now, which is, we have these permit requirements, these MS4 permit requirements to reduce rate and volume or reduce pollutant loads. And where do we start? Where do we look for these things? What are our options? What techniques can we employ in our jurisdictions? So I'm going to cover a little bit about that, and we'll kind of go through some examples that are in Pennsylvania. Some other examples I think are good, and then we'll check out some projects, sites at the tour, and get a chance to kind of brainstorm and talk. So what we're talking about today, the practices, the approach that I'm detailing out today, can pretty much be found in the Center's Manual 3, which I think Tom, who just left, had a big part of writing. It's a free for download on our website. It provides extensive guidance on different retrofit types, the process for finding them, and all this stuff. So what I'm talking about today, you can essentially download the manual for free at our website and print it out. So what we're talking about here is really what can we do to reduce pollutant loads, to reduce rate and volume. And there is some economy of scale. We can look at some small-scale site projects, some of the bioretention rain gardens that Tom was showing before, little maybe bioretentions that are picking up parts of parking lots. We can also look at large-scale retrofits that can treat large areas. So these may be basin retrofits, basin storage retrofits. So they may be, we already have a large volume of water directed to an existing BMP, but that BMP may not be providing all the treatment that we want. There may be opportunities within the channel to look at, what are we doing stream restoration wise, and then what can we do upstream of that to protect that investment. So sometimes these will be paired with stream restoration projects, and I think there'll be a lot more on stream restoration as we go. But we'll be looking at a couple different versions of this during the field tour. We'll be looking at a couple that are small scale, just capturing a small area, and we'll look at a couple that are capturing much larger areas, and what opportunities we have for both of those types of BMPs. So in that book, you'll see this is some older numbers. This is 2006 dollars, but I think the general trend is still pretty true in terms of cost per cubic foot of stormwater treated. And you'll see up here at the top, you'll see pond retrofits, rain gardens, and new storage retrofits are generally pretty good efficiency. Rain gardens is more or less up there because generally that's something a homeowner may do on their own. So maybe some outreach, some minor assistance, they can do it on their own, so their cost to the jurisdiction may be relatively low. But pond retrofits are a big one that we feel is a good place to start looking, and we'll get into this as we go, because you already have a lot of volume of water. You already have the water going to that point. In many cases when we go and we look at sites, the water's kind of going all over the place, and you're only picking up little bits at a time. So you can only achieve some limited reductions, and you kind of have to have a number of different projects to get that whole site. Whereas with stormwater ponds, there's already a system in place to deliver water to that point, and if there are opportunities to implement projects there, we may be very successful. But then it goes all the way through. We have large bioretentions, stormwater planters, impervious cover removal, and then down here on the end we have things like green roofs, which can be obviously quite expensive depending on the type of green roof you're installing and what building you're installing it on. So where are the loads? Where do we think are good places to look? Well, the first thing we advocate for is a desktop retrofit analysis. So starting in the office, looking at maps, looking at GIS layers, trying to figure out where should we go to look. You know, just driving aimlessly around, you may spot a few sites. It's going to take you a long time. If you spend some time in the office looking at some data, you can kind of quickly narrow down your scope. So the first thing that we think is very beneficial to look at, and something that if you're at the MS4, DEP MS4 trainings, they're really looking for from MS4s is a solid map of your system. So hopefully if you don't have a map of your system, how many people have a completed map of their MS4? Not many, or anybody. And that's, you know, I think where everybody is. So hopefully folks are working on mapping their systems and looking at, you know, where are my pipes, where are my outlets, what do I own, where are my conveyances. That's hopefully something you're working on. I know DEP is going to be looking for that in some of your future permit submittals. But this is going to start to indicate where are your existing BMPs, where are your existing culverts, where are your impervious areas. It's going to help you start to identify where are my opportunities and where are the problems likely coming from. Typically, and this was the approach that we took here when we did some of the retrofit inventory for the TMDL, is you look at public land. That's land that you own, you maintain, you already have some level of control over, so you can have some confidence that you're going to be able to implement that project. That's not to say that you can't look at private land. It just means obviously you need to engage that landowner and work with that landowner over time. And that may produce some hurdles and some issues as you go through the design and implementation process. But typically if it's your land, you have a lot of control over that. And you can sort of dictate when and how fast things are going to happen with a little bit more confidence. Neighborhood scale drainage systems or infrastructure. We're going to look at one later today, the Edgewood Pond, or what we affectionately call the alpaca pond, because there's an alpaca farm just downstream of it. So these are, this is a facility that's already collecting runoff from a large neighborhood. So, and in this case, it's one that's also owned by the municipality. There's municipal capital improvement projects. If you're pulling together a Chesapeake Bay pollution reduction plan, you're already required to do this. In the plan requirement, it says you must evaluate all planned public infrastructure upgrades for implementation of green infrastructure, environmental site design, you name it. So as you work on public municipal infrastructure upgrade projects, you should be evaluating, can we implement some stormwater management, green infrastructure projects as part of that. That's a requirement of your Chesapeake Bay pollution reduction plan, and ideally that's the time to get in there and do some of this work. You already are having contractors on site, you may already have permits in place for disturbance, things like that. So that's a good time to get in there and get projects in the ground. And then there's large facilities or large impervious cover mapping. So where do you have large areas of imperviousness? Because that's obviously going to contribute a significant amount of rate and volume, and where you may want to look for where can I install some projects that are going to reduce that rate and volume. So we're going to go through these 8 steps pretty quickly. First one is retrofit scoping, just kind of coming up with some goals. Second part is the desktop analysis, which we just discussed a little bit. The third is getting out there and doing some retrofitting reconnaissance, doing some investigation, driving around, looking at sites. We'll practice this a little bit today. Compiling that information into an inventory, evaluating those against each other and ranking them so you can have a prioritized list of projects that you can implement that hopefully give you the most bang for the buck. You will have maybe a treatment analysis. So we have this group of projects. What do we get for them? How much load reduction are we going to get over time? Then, obviously, as you sort of pick out those top performing projects and assemble the funding, you'll be going into final design and construction. And then finally, what Tom and Cecilia were talking about a little bit is sort of maintenance, inspection and maintenance. So we're going to go through at least the first couple of these. The first one is retrofit scoping. So this is defining what your objectives are. And in many cases, this may be what is your pollutant of concern, what is the current stream load, and what kind of volume, runoff volume are we dealing with. In Blair County, at least a big chunk of the county, has a TMDL on the little j for sediment. So when we came and did did some of the retrofitting work, our main pollutant, target pollutant, was sediment. And dealing with sediment is basically dealing with runoff volume. Now when we look at the TMDL document, it has some modeling data in there for how they developed that TMDL. And when you look at that modeling data, the in-stream component, the sediment load that they are attributing to stream bank erosion was significant, orders of magnitude higher than overland runoff. So what we're really talking about is, while we are treating and installing these practices in upland areas, what we're really trying to do is reduce rate and volume so that the streams aren't eroding, because that's where our loads are coming from. Now, depending on the watershed you're in, it may be a little bit different, and there may be some data analysis to indicate where the pollutant loads are coming from or what the problems are. But at least in this area, that's what our target was sediment, and it was really a result of rate and volume issues. And then you want to start to screen for what retrofit potentials do we have. So impervious cover, we mentioned existing stormwater basins, how old are they, what were they built to do, where are their culverts, and where are their outfalls, where is their public lands, what do the street corridors look like, are there buffers, that kind of thing, and then what kind of development, redevelopment potential is there. Especially redevelopment is a great opportunity where there was no stormwater management to get in there and add some stormwater management through that redevelopment process. So, desktop analysis, hopefully, as you all are working on developing your MS4 maps, you should end up with a map that looks something like this. So, MS4s, are odd, It's hard to figure out always what's draining to this ditch or what's draining to that pipe. But that's what they're looking for. What you're responsible for in the plans and for DEP is the quantity and quality of water that runs into and out of your MS4 system. So understanding what flows into and out of your system is important. And your maps will generally look like something like this. So you're going to have little systems in place, little pockets that all drain to different systems and outlet. And each of these little green dots in here indicates like an inlet or something like that. Here's a blow up of what you would see. Here's like a street map view. You can see the pipe network, where you have inlets, where you have outlets, what they outlet to. That's what an MS4 map hopefully should look like, and should have a lot of detail. So you can go in there and start to identify, where are my inlets, where are the pipe systems, what am I responsible for when I'm developing my plan and I'm identifying retrofit opportunities. So having some good GIS layers, things like topo, soil, existing facilities, and a good MS4 map is really going to help you narrow your focus down to those spots that are going to give you the most bang for the buck and are going to be part of your system that you're responsible for. The next step after you've done that, you've identified your pollutants that you're concerned, your goals, you've gotten your map, you've identified some sites, is you're going to get out in the field and you're going to do some retrofit reconnaissance. Now we use what we call an RRI form, or Retrofit Reconnaissance Investigation form. It's included in your packet, and we'll be playing with it a little bit in the field. But basically, that form helps walk through some of the more typical questions that you want to ask yourself when you're in the field. And sort of walks you through it, so hopefully you have a nice complete form when you're back in the office. So this usually requires some advanced preparation, usually some site maps, some understanding again of soil, so some of that initial work in the office will help fill out the form before you even get in the field. And then as you complete your data collection in the field, you'll probably have some sort of final summary as to what you think this site's capable of doing. So not all sites are going to work. Some sites you might get to and quickly realize we have utility conflicts, land ownership conflicts. So not all sites are going to work, but you need to typically get on the ground and start to look at things like the outlets, inlets, where there might be visual indicators of infrastructure, that kind of thing, to start to identify what is our opportunity here and start to collect some of that data that's in that form. What you'll do then is you'll compile your inventory. So at this point, you'll have probably a stack of completed field forms. Maybe you look at all of the stormwater basins that is in the municipality that either are included in the MS4 system or drain to the MS4 system. You may have looked at roadside swales, you may have looked at the schools, you may have looked at parks and other municipally owned sites like the DPW garages or maintenance facilities. So those sites you'll have a sheet for, and in that you may have, or hopefully have, estimated some storage volume. So how much space do I have? What are my options for excavation? How much volume can I actually capture here? Some quick calculations on what are some pollutant removals and some volume reduction calculations. Quick cost estimate is helpful, and then having those sites all on a map somewhere so you can start to look at spatially where they are, especially compared to hotspots or other areas that you've identified as having contributed to potentially great volume, so large impervious areas. So you'll compile this, you'll end up with a map, hopefully, that indicates where they are with some photos of each site. So you'll have some photos. Each site might be coded. Coming up with your own coding system is fine, whatever makes sense, so that you can sort of track what the projects are, and then you'll have a sketch in there as to what you're proposing. It's usually a sketch you do. What I usually do is I create a decent sketch in the field, and then I come back into the office later when I'm not standing out in the cold and rain, and I clean the sketch up a little bit, especially for those that you look particularly like they might be helpful. But you'll have a sketch, you'll have a completed field form, and you'll start to build up this map. The next part is ranking. So not all the projects are going to be good. Some will be ones that are maybe small, but if the opportunity comes up, it's worth doing. Other projects might be, hey, this is a great project. We should use some of our NIFWIF funding to build it, and let's get to work on it right away. So this may be based on your own local sort of ranking criteria. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just how much pounds per dollar spent. I mean, that may be what you're most interested in, and I would argue it probably should be. But there may be other factors that you may want to consider: demonstration value. Is it at a school where kids can use it as an outdoor learning environment? Is it someplace that's already a problem, and so you're going to have to fix it? These are maintenance problems, and you're going to need to fix it anyway. So let's go ahead and boost this one up the chain because we got to get in there anyway. And it may be based on citizens' concerns. So some of the projects may require tree removal, and that may be unacceptable. There may be safety considerations for some of these. There may be aesthetic considerations. So Tom went through a number of plants and some different strategies for doing bioretention. Some are up front, and you want them looking nice, and you want to be prepared for maintenance. Others are in the back, and if they don't look great, it's okay as long as they're working well. What are the long-term maintenance? That's a big one. We're going to build this thing, now we have to maintain it. So what is it going to take? What is the maintenance interval? How much does it cost? And then, of course, construction costs, construction timelines. What season does it need to be in? What kind of permits do we need to build those? Those all may work into your ranking system in order to determine which of these projects you're going to do first, which ones you're going to do last. Other things that you're going to want to look for is that treatment analysis or the benefits of it. So what is the feasibility of the project? Do you have available head? Is the access good? Do you own the land? What is the cost per acre? If you're doing, say, like tree planting or something like that, what is the cost per pound removed, or the cost per cubic foot of stormwater treated? So how much money are we paying per unit delivered? Are we getting stream channel protection out of this project? Again, into the maintenance, the visibility. Is there habitat benefits to it? And then are there other ancillary community benefits? Maybe it's integrated into a park. Some of the projects that we were engaged in York County, they were already going to be putting in a park. It wasn't anything currently, it was just an open field, and they were installing a park. And so that was a great opportunity to go ahead and get in there and do some stream restoration with some connected wetlands, to put in bioretention in their planned parking lots, because you're already going to have this park's atmosphere, we can really set it up for bird watching and nature hikes and that kind of thing. So there may be some other benefits to evaluating what are the projects and where can I do them. With that, you kind of need to know, especially when you talk about your dollars per pound reduced, you need to understand what is the loading rate going to that BMP, so to that proposed practice. And there's a variety of places you can get that information. This table here is from the Little Juniata TMDL for sediment. So this is the loading rates associated with each land use. Now this one's a little different because it's not per acre. Or actually I think Joe normalized this for per acre. So it gives you an idea of the order of magnitude. So we have some cropland in it. That's obviously high, but we're talking generally relatively low cost BMPs for that. But you can see down here, stream bank is where we're getting the load from. But in order to reduce, that load, we really need to adjust the rate and volume from these uses. But these give you the land use loading rates that were used to develop the TMDL. So if you're trying to be consistent with, say, a TMDL, then you might want to use something out of this, which will give you your land use loading rates for that particular site that you're on. Now, the thing that's tricky about this is how do you assign a stream bank erosion reduction rate? And that's a little trickier to get at. You could look at how much volume versus where you are in the watershed, but when you start to get to this, it's trickier because you're talking about modeling how much volume is it versus where the stream is, what is the gradient of the streams. MapShed, that tool is free for download. It's developed by Penn State, and you can actually implement projects within the tool, and it will adjust this number. So, but at least for just back of the envelope, quick sort of ranking, this may be some place to get it. The CAST tool is the Chesapeake Assessment and Scenario tool. So for any jurisdiction that's in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, they'll have land use loading rates for you in there. And I'll show you a slide of that. And that's consistent with the Chesapeake Bay model. So that would be a good tool to use if you're just doing a Chesapeake Bay pollution reduction plan. You don't necessarily need to do a TMDL plan. What I would encourage you to do if you're doing a TMDL plan, use the load rates that's in the TMDL document. That'll keep you sort of level and speaking the same language as the TMDL. If you just have to do a Chesapeake Bay pollution reduction plan, you may consider the CAST tool, because in the Bay model, they don't model stream banks separately. It's incorporated into the land use. So it automatically, in a way, will sort of give you a load reduction for in-stream as well. So it takes a little bit of the technical stuff out of it, but that's sort of a good thing and a bad thing. It just depends on how comfortable you are with models. We also have, the center also has a couple of tools that are free. We have the Clean Water Optimization tool, which can help you optimize BMPs and assign costs and rank them. And then we have the Watershed Treatment Model, which is a spreadsheet-based model tool. You can input loading rates, and there's some recommended loading rates in there, and create your own model using that. It's a free tool to use. It's spreadsheet format, so pretty much any machine can run it. All these tools are free. CAST is online. The MapShed tool is online. You can download it, and our tools are also online. You can download. There's other ones as well that you may choose to use that are out there, and WindSlam is one. So there's a bunch of different tools that you can use. That's just a couple. Hopefully you'll get to some sort of ranking spreadsheet at some point that sort of indicates which are your highest performing projects. The key thing to keep in mind is, depending on the regulatory situation you're in, if you're in a TMDL situation in particular, you got to be consistent about using models. You can't use one model to dictate current loads and loads to a BMP, and then use another model to run what's going on after we implement, because they're using different systems, different math equations, different loading rates. It's not gonna connect. It's not gonna make any sense. So if you pick one of these tools to use to understand what your load reductions are, you need to stick with it consistently all the way through. Otherwise, it's not gonna make any sense on the back end. But as you get through this, you're using that same loading rate for all the BMPs. You're using good local cost data, you should hopefully end up with a good prioritized ranked list. So your thing might start with something like this, which looks at pollutant removal. So we have our different unique site IDs. We have the type of BMP it is, the drainage area, what our preload is, what the efficiency of that BMP is, what kind of design do we think we need in terms of, is it going to be a quick, easy one to do? Is it going to be difficult? Do we need to, take up extra area? And then what is our pounds reduced? So that starts to get the process, but you might want to take it a little bit further and start looking at some additional categories like what is the runoff depth treated, what planning level costs are we associated with it. So obviously we're not going to know for sure what the costs are until we get maybe in the concept design phase, but we may be able to assign at least some costs for now to help us with our ranking. We may have some ownership. We may assign some costs for owner or some points for ownerships or construction access or project visibility, and these points can all be modified and changed based on what the stakeholders think is most important. And then you'll end up with a total number of points, and you can start to prioritize. So R17 looks like a good project, and we got excellence. It's on public property, so it's scoring pretty high. And so now we kind of have a list of projects we can go down, especially as funding comes available. We can start to pick these off. Some are very cheap, some are more expensive. And we may go off that list as we have other sort of opportunities pop up, but this sort of will give you a nice list. And then not only that, when you go to apply for grants or things like that, you can say, this was a high priority project for us. And grant funders always look for that kind of thing, that you've thought through, that you haven't just picked a project out of thin air and gone, we want to do this one, that you've evaluated a whole suite of opportunities, and you've used this type of a system to identify which ones are the best ones, and you end up with a list and you say, we're doing the top 5 projects on our list that cost between this much and this much. And you may end up with some in there that are much more expensive but offer a lot of benefit. So the idea is we want to go from a map that looks like this with all kinds of BMPs all over it. Some are red, some are blue, some are green, maybe some are good, some are bad, to a map that looks like this, much more clean. And we know here's the blue dots represent the upland BMPs we want to do, and the green little smudges are where we want to do some stream restoration, maybe some buffer work. So, but you can see this, we're kind of all over the place now. We've really refined our focus down to just a handful of BMPs that we're going to work on getting concept designs ready for, that we're going to fundraise around, and we're going to hopefully schedule for construction and implementation. So I'm just going to go through a couple of existing some opportunities that we like to look at in the field, and one of the first ones is the existing retrofit or existing stormwater basins. Again, one of our favorites because a lot of water is already going there. If you do enough retrofitting work where you don't have existing stormwater infrastructure and you're just kind of trying to find a place to put these, it can get to be kind of frustrating because you're only dealing with little bits of water, and you quickly kind of go, oh, now there's some sort of pipeline here, or fiber optic cable or something going on that makes it a little bit tricky. Whereas these areas are already designated for stormwater, and it's just a matter of how are they functioning and what are they doing. So here's some examples. This one here, you can see water in, water out. We got a low flow path, so for water quality storms, for just your general 1-inch rain event, this thing is not doing anything. Water's going in and it's going straight out. So even just pulling out that low flow channel and getting water to spread out and actually use the basin is a start. And there's obviously other things we can do by looking at the riser structure and other things, but just getting that low flow channel out of there so water can spread out, maybe infiltrate, that's going to be a big thing. Here's one that we love a lot because it shows like the smallest, shortest flow path BMP ever. You see water in, water out, not a lot of room. We seem to have a lot of space to work with, but not a lot of treatment area. So we have, it seems like we've got some good opportunity there based on the amount of room around it and how short the flow path is. We're not getting a lot of treatment in these. So these are these are projects we want to think about. And so when we're thinking about these, there's a couple of ways to look at that, and that's to basically create some more storage in there. So we can create more storage by excavating the bottom and creating a wet pool or installing a sand filter in the bottom of it. And I got some examples of that. Or if we really want to get fancy, we can raise the embankment to get some more volume out of it. We can modify the riser structure. We can look at what is the riser structure doing, what are the outlets doing, what storms are they passing, is there ways that we can alter or modify the stormwater routing of that system in order to get some water quality benefit out of it. Many of these were just based for flood control protection. There may be opportunities for us to squeeze some water quality benefit out of them by looking at the riser structure. We can potentially trade storage for water quality. So some of these ponds are really quite large, and there may be some excess storage in there, and we can actually modify that riser structure and modify the pond so that some of that storage actually goes to water quality treatment. That may work or may not, it really depends on individual ponds, but it's something to think about, is trading storage for water quality benefit. The other one to think about is changing the geometry of it. We kind of looked at some of these, a straight shot, water goes in, water goes out. What we really want is a longer residence time, a longer flow path. So looking at, again, that routing, where's the inlet, where's the outlet, how does water travel through this BMP, and can we make it take a longer flow path so it's retained a longer period of time. This is an example of, it's actually an active construction site in Lancaster County, and you can see all these baffles around the outlet, and so water has to go all around those before it can get out. So that's a temporary system that's in place during construction, but I think it's a good illustration of what we're talking about here, which is trying to make the water travel around a much longer flow path so it's in that facility for a longer period of time than just in and out. And then there's a combination of the two. We can add treatment and change the geometry. Here's an example of a stormwater dry pond where they actually converted it to a sort of a wetland, wet pond with a longer flow path. You can see they put this berm in, so now water, instead of water just coming in here and basically going straight out there, you can almost see the flow path. Now water comes in, we have a standing pool, so we have water quality treatment, and it's got to go all the way around before it gets here. We even have some wetland benches in here, so that as water comes up, we get some additional water quality treatment. So you may be able to do a little bit of both, depending on the size of the practice and its drainage area. So here's just some examples. This is sort of a deluxe version, but sort of helps to illustrate the amount of benefit you can get out of some of these conversions. So let's assume that this is a dry extended detention pond currently with a 250-acre drainage area. If we're using the numbers we had before, the 79 pounds per acre, we get a little shy of 20,000 pounds per year of sediment load delivered to this facility each year. If we upgrade this pond to a new extended detention, we get a 60% reduction on that. So that's almost 12,000 pounds of sediment per year. So that's quite a bit, and you know, we're not having to build 100 or 1,000 little BMPs all over the place. So it's kind of a deluxe version, but that's what we're talking about. And we can get some pretty big chunks of sediment load reduction by improving these BMPs. So this is a local example. We're going to look at this later today. This is the Edgewood Drive Pond. It services a medium density residential neighborhood. You can see this is the pond here. This is me when it was a lot colder. We have an inlet here. You can see there's definitely some sediment coming out, but the flow basically goes right out. You can see here the outlet flush with the ground, so there's no real ponding involved. We have an overflow, and then we have another overflow. So there may be some things to consider. This is downstream of the pond. It's not a great picture. It's hard to kind of capture but it is definitely eroding down through the neighboring property. So we're clearly this pond is not necessarily controlling rate and volume to the point that it's reducing erosion downstream. So also with this site is owned by the municipality. So great opportunity. It's fenced. There's an access gate. Hopefully we can get in there today and we can all look around. But these are the types of opportunities that we like to look for. There's retrofits near outfall. So where there's an outfall, there may be an opportunity to implement a practice nearby, or maybe just upstream. So one is you cut the outfall off, you create some sort of check dam or flow splitter of sorts into a dugout treatment area, or you might have a manhole with a splitter in the pipe that splits some of the flow off into a pretreatment cell and a stormwater treatment and then another outfall. So any large flows just going to continue on, and then the flows that this can take will be split off at the outlet. So some opportunities to look at, can we pull some of this water out before it gets to the outfall. Here's some just sketched examples of this. Residential lot where we have our inlet at the cul-de-sac is taking water and currently outletting to a stream. If we install an outlet here, we could pull it off into an area and install, in this case, they're calling for a sort of a stormwater wetland. Another example where they're looking at more of a bioretention area where they're peeling it off. They have their forebay, so like Tom was saying, we got easy maintenance. Hopefully we can get maybe some equipment down here if we need to maintain it, and then we have our bioretention system with under drain that outlets out into the stream. So some different examples of peeling water off from an existing outfall. What we also looked at a lot in this area was treatment in the conveyance. There's a lot of open section roads with swales that we can think about and consider. So some situations like this, obviously you're talking about stream restoration and maybe beyond the scope of what we're thinking about, but we may also be looking at channels like this, or maybe even channels like this, where maybe we have some opportunity to implement some additional measures to improve the treatment capacity of it. So here's an example of a project we completed. This is actually takes some runoff water. It's in Maryland, but it's just in Maryland, right up against the state line. And this is a stormwater wetland project in Rising Sun. And basically the way this works is water comes actually down this side of the street and enters a culvert pipe, and it comes across here. And then what this looked like before was just one grass channel all the way down, and the stream is just on the other side of that tree line there. And so what we did was we installed, this was after a heavy rain, there's a forebay here, a little sand filter bay, and then there's two wetland cells that go down. This was all part of the development of a park. So there's a dog park there now, and right over in this area here, I think you can almost see the fences in there. And then this treats like a 20-acre upland drainage area that was made up of state highway, local roads, and a older medium density residential development that had no stormwater controls. So in the conveyance system, and then it just outlets into the stream, and it's been working great. This photo here is about maybe 8 months after construction. So if you went back and looked at it now, particularly down here, we got a lot of wetland vegetation and cattails and stuff like that that are growing up. Birds, amphibians galore. The town's very happy with that project. Here's another example, one along a highway, some check dams in here, some native vegetation, pretty simple, but the key thing is we have some ability to pond up water and treat it in place. You can see we've got weir structures that are designed to pass certain flows, but improves the effectiveness of that conveyance structure. I like this photo. This is all the way out in the west, and the reason I like this is because it sort of resonated with me in terms of a lot of what I've seen around this area, where we have sort of these really tight, narrow ditch lines with some slope, and we got our local road, and we've got a homeowner nearby. So this is what it looks like before, and this was their construction project completed. You can see they've regraded. They've got some wood debris in there to act as both grade control and to provide some organic matter. They've got some plants along the slopes and erosion matting. Not in this area, but more food for thought. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunities to think creatively about our opportunities in the actual drainage channel. Another one that's out there that we've done a little bit of in Pennsylvania, I've seen a little bit of, certainly is very popular in Maryland, is this regenerative stormwater conveyance or step pool storm conveyance. And this is typically employed in situations just like this, where you have an outfall that's basically blowing out a hillside, or blowing out a whole chunk of land before it gets to the stream channel. Some folks have been implementing this as a stream restoration technique. I would caution you that you may run into some permitting hurdles if you do that, but when you're using it on outfalls, you know, not in a stream, zero order streams, you know, there's a very effective way to fix these outfalls. Essentially what we're doing is we're creating step pools. So water comes out, we got riffle, grade control structures pools, riffle, grade control structure pool. This is a sand wood chip media that's designed to pass flow through it as well, and can really help solve these problems. I have an example, a couple examples from around here. This is a site we looked at right nearby here with Tom Levine, and this is downstream from a stormwater pond. Again, these stormwater ponds aren't necessarily preventing erosion. So just by saying here's a stormwater pond, it's all good. This is being caused by discharge from the stormwater pond. It's between two houses. The homeowners are complaining about it. They want it fixed. So this is one of the sites we evaluated. That's Tom there, give you an indication for how much erosion is occurring. I mean, it's up to almost his chest at some points, so some significant erosion. So this is a technique that you could employ here, where you're essentially filling that in with a sand wood chip mix and using boulders to check that flow and create a more of a pool, riffle structure that allows water to seep into the ground and slows down that velocity. And it looks pretty nice. Here's an example of a project we completed a couple of years ago in Mountville, Pennsylvania. The project partners there was the local intermunicipal committee, the county planning commission, Lancaster County Planning, as well as I think Land Studies did a little bit of work on it. I know they're speaking later. The excavating contractor was Flyway Excavation, so some good guys here. You can see this was a classic situation. It's a park, so ideal retrofitting situation. Very popular park, has football fields, you know, they play with lights and big scoreboards. So very popular for the athletic folks, and there's a pool there, so it's heavily used. This stormwater pipe collects, I think, all of the stormwater from the parking lot and discharges it just like you see there, and it was just chewing away the hill, working its way down to the stream, and that we did a retrofit inventory there. This ranked very highly, so we actually implemented it with some grant funds. You can see this is mid-construction. They're in the process of installing the boulders. You can see they've dug it out and they're starting to install the boulders as they go down. Mini excavator, you know, we didn't have a lot of heavy equipment, and a skid steer was basically what they used to get the project done. I got some photos of what it looks like. This was almost immediately after construction. Few issues we ran into. We found out that the pool was also connected to this, which was a surprise to the contractors when they were working on a bright, sunny, dry day, and all of a sudden water just started flying out of the pipe, and it turned out they were doing some maintenance on the pool and letting the water go, so a little bit of a surprise there, and you're going to run into that. But this, you can see it held up very well, even during rain post-construction. We had the community actually, what triggered this was, this is following the path of erosion. This is a walking trail, and it was blowing out the trail, and that's really what kind of triggered the athletic people, the people that don't necessarily, you know, aren't concentrating on MS4 requirements. They wanted their path fixed. So we integrated the path into the project, and then this is what the project looked like about a year later. So growing it nicely, plants are doing great, very little erosion at all anywhere in the project. And when you get to the bottom of the project, almost no water comes out, even during heavy rain events. Almost no water gets past about the 5th pool down. It all gets converted into subsurface flow at that point. So very effective. There's a nice sign there. If you ever find yourself in Mountainville, Pennsylvania, and you want to go to the park, it's there. It's Freilich Park, and it's a nice project. It's holding up well. Large impervious cover, on-site retrofits. So again, just talking about where do we have impervious cover, what opportunities do we have. This is an example from a township hall where they basically had to redo the parking lot. Parking lot was in need of repair. What they did was they took out some of the parking stalls, installed porous pavers, installed bioretention in the islands. Looks great, works great, and it's right there where people can see it. Just an example of what your field form, obviously this is very neat. Field form, it's a digitized example, but a field form might look something like this, where you're identifying where you have impermeable pavers, where you might have an infiltration trench, where you have your bioretention islands, those kinds of things. Here's an example of a project that we did. This is on the eastern shore of Maryland. This is at the county or the town's DPW garage. Also, the police department was there in a small town. The problem that they had here was, you can see this road comes down. This is like a pizza shop and a restaurant and a couple of houses. And then you have the police department and the highway department here. Cars, to cut the light, there's a light here, they would come zipping through here. And the police department didn't like that, and the highway people didn't like that. So we thought, here's an opportunity to use bioretention as not only to treat runoff, but also as a traffic calming mechanism. So we matched the turning radius on this curve with their doors so that they can get their equipment out and in, cut off their traffic. While it's not shown here, we did install bollards along here, just the plastic reflective ones so people can see it. But you can see water comes down from our drainage area into here. This is our clean out, that's our overflow, and then our drain is here, and we patched into that. So this one, it controls traffic, and it also treats for water quality. So that was another high-ranking one, not necessarily because of cost effectiveness, but because they had a traffic problem here they wanted to solve, and here was a good opportunity to solve the traffic problem and get water quality benefits. Adjacent to large parking lots, I know there's a lot of these around. These are particularly challenging, I know, because you're dealing with private landowners, but this is the source of much of our rate and volume issues. So you should certainly look at these opportunities. These tend to be very expensive, very time consuming to get at. So particularly if there's some redevelopment going on, that's a good time to get in there and try to get some of this. But treating this stuff with large scale bioretentions, or even going to something like a wet pond or a wetland, anything's better than nothing at this point. So looking at what options you have, recognizing that these are challenging situations. People put that pavement there for a reason. They're not always interested in pulling it up. But again, when we're trying to tackle rate and volume issues, these are areas we should at least look at and consider, but are definitely sometimes very challenging to figure out. Green Streets was one that Tom and Cecilia covered. Here's a couple examples. They can take a variety of forms. Typically, we see a lot of these traffic or these curb bump outs, which can function as traffic calming, slows the traffic down, peels some water off. You can see this one here. You have tree pits. They're actually integrated in, so water can get into the tree pits and into this system. They can look really nice. They can deal with some traffic issues. Obviously, having that traffic situation also means that during construction you have to manage for traffic, so that's going to increase your costs there.
Do they tie into like the downspouts that come to the curb, like the?
Yeah, I think.
And it's in like both.
This one, the downspouts are integrated, and this one they're integrated. I'm not sure about this one.
Good. I just wonder that.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. I think it's a matter of your drainage area and how big your system is and all that kind of stuff. As Cecilia indicated, they're good at picking up trash. It's just good and bad. I mean, it's good that it's not in your pipe or in the waterway. It's bad that, you know, now you got trash sitting there and somebody's got to go clean it out. But they are pretty effective at picking up trash. Here's an example, New York City I stumbled upon. I have some nice curb cuts. It's in a little median area, so it certainly can be implemented in very, very urbanized areas. Impervious cover reduction. You know, if we don't need the impervious area, why do we have it? And certainly there's a number of cases like that where we can actually get rid of it, turn it back to grass. There's a significant amount of credit there just for removing impervious area. Scott's here, so he can probably talk more about this than I can, but Altoona's got a program in place to demolish abandoned buildings. And I think when you and I first spoke, it was, hey, we have this community program. I'm not sure if they were even thinking of it as a water quality program. But there's credit to be had there. How much impervious area are reducing? I think, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea is they demolish these derelict buildings, restore it to grass, or maybe even plant a few trees. And I think the neighboring landowner might be responsible for mowing it or something like that.
Well, we encourage, you know, these are city lots that are half regular lots, 25 by 120 foot, usually. And we certainly encourage a contiguous landowner to pick up a side lot. If you don't maintain it, then you don't maintain stuff. But, you know, instead of just having brownfields, they turn into grass. But the main thing is that we lose all the impermeable from structure and garage and driveway. In all those cases, we wind up with, you know, I think we're over it now. We do somewhere between 50 and 100 a year, depends. Usually probably averaging about 60. And yeah, well, since we were able to track the program, it's been 13 acres. And inside, yeah, a relatively urbanized area like Altoona, 13 acres of impermeable is actually pretty significant. So.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about the cost to treat that in a highly urbanized area. You know, some of these treatment costs are unbelievable per acre, and just to pull it up for other reasons entirely is just the more of the point with the work with Scott was more of let's just account for it so we're getting the credit. So you may think of some of these programs as community amenity programs, but certainly they can also count towards your reduction requirements as a matter of just accounting for it.
It never had a stormwater component before. It was just one of those things that when we were actually working on the project with you, it occurred to me when I was going one, I'm like, well, how many of these have we done?
Yeah.
How much does that account for? And it just, you know, so just because we're going through the process, we decided to start tracking it, and it turned out to be quite a bit. But yeah, it was totally serendipitous. We were not planning to use it for stormwater.
Yeah, but it's there, so just think about that. And since we did the DEP, the road tour with DEP, we had several other jurisdictions doing very similar things and weren't accounting for it as a stormwater practice. So if you're doing some of that work, those are credits. This is a shot from one of the field sites that we went to. This is a neighborhood that was constantly impacted by flooding, and so that most of the houses are gone now. They've been bought up and removed, and so we still have the road network. I think there's a few houses left, but over time, you know, we can get in there and remove that road network. Here's just some pictures of what it looks like. So you have this whole road network and no houses that it's really servicing. There were a few pieces of that area that we identified that could easily be removed. So again, every little bit of that you're pulling up is going to go a long way to achieving your credits. And if you're doing it anyway as part of a community revitalization project, hey, let's get double the whammy for our bucks spent. So redevelopment and revitalization, obviously a great opportunity to get in there and implement stormwater management, particularly when you're talking about those large impervious lots. I mean, you see a lot of these commercial sites now, they're peeling off part of their parking lot for a restaurant or a Chick-fil-A or something like that. You know, those are good opportunities to get in there and do some stormwater treatment as part of that redevelopment process, and hopefully you can get some benefit as you go through that redevelopment phase. Those are obviously good opportunities, and it's a kind of a evaluate as you go. I think in general people try to incentivize redevelopment as best as possible, and certainly I encourage that, but you should also think about it as a good opportunity to implement stormwater management where maybe there is none. So, we've talked a bit about the types of retrofits that we look for. You know, desktop analysis, we've kind of narrowed it down. What do we do when we get in the field? Well, when we get in the field, we're going to start looking at the parking lots, looking at the sites, and go, what are our opportunities? And these are the things that we start to look at. Well, first thing you look at is what is the drainage area? What's contributing to the site? And of that drainage area, how much of it is impervious? We have what surface area do we have to work with? How much area can I use to build my project? Whether that's, you know, top surface area for something like bioretention or a stormwater wetland, or whether it's an area that we need to dig up for an underground system. But you need to know how much area you have. Tom mentioned this before, was available ahead. So how deep can we make it? Where does the stormwater network come in? So what can we pipe it into? That's going to dictate how deep we can make it. And then what are the considerations for ponding depth, side slopes, and the bottom surface area? So if we're going to dig it down, we want a lot of ponding, how much slope is that going to be? So we may have a top surface area that's this big, but once we factor in 3-to-1 slopes to get down to our elevation to get our ponding, we may actually have a significantly less area to work with. So you need to consider, you know, what is this going to look like? What is the shape of it? Your top surface area may not necessarily be reflective of what your treatment surface area is, but that's, you want to be collecting this data in the field. Again, hydraulic head, this is something that we're constantly looking at. While we're in the field, this is Dave again. Our colleague Dave has got his tape measure out. He's checking the drainage, the inlets to see how deep it is. You can see here, this gives you an idea of what we're looking at. We're measuring down the pipe invert, so this gives you an idea. If we're going to, say, put something up here and we were going to patch into this pipe somewhere, that's how much volume we have, or how much room we have to work with in terms of the depth of our practice. So once we get below here, we're not going to be able to put in an under drain unless we're using an upturned elbow or something like that. But this will help us to understand how much room do we have to dig down and still patch into something in terms of an under drain or something like that. So getting out there with some tape measures and looking closely at pipe inverts. So the data we're going to collect out in the field is what is our available width, what is our available length, what is our top surface area, and bottom surface area in terms of what do we think our actual size of our bioretention or our practice is going to be, and then what is the depth of ponding that we can get by doing that. So if we're going to dig it down a couple feet to get all of our systems in place and get a foot of ponding, then obviously that's going to require some side slopes, and we're going to reduce. So looking at that, and where we have, how much room we have for gravel and that kind of thing. Tom talked about this. There is the opportunity for upturned elbows where we can buy ourselves a little bit more room, but we are going to have this sort of water storage zone that's going to be wet all the time. And Tom mentioned some of the issues to consider with the upturned elbow design. When we're looking at stormwater basins, the thing we're going to be thinking about is, are we converting this? What are we converting it to? Are we enhancing it? Say we're just maybe modifying the riser structure a little bit. Are we restoring it? Maybe it was a pond that was actually working quite well, but something went wrong. It needs some maintenance. We need to do some routine maintenance, maybe some restoration maintenance to bring it back. What is our surface area on the basin floor? So how much room do we have to work with if we're going to put in something different? And then of course, what is our drainage area and impervious cover in that drainage area? Typically we try to get an idea of this in the field, and then also, if we can, get a hold of the site plans and take a look at what was the pond designed to do, what's the actual drainage area. But of course it's good to verify that in the field. There's been plenty of places I've been where it says, here's the bioretention area, and it's supposed to collect runoff from, on the plan says this whole area, but then when you actually look at the pipe network, not all that is actually made it to it. So somewhere along that construction process, something got rerouted, something didn't get installed properly, and so it's not necessarily getting there. Or it could be conversely, maybe you have a lot of overland flow that's getting there from other areas that are not identified in the plan, or there's been some different development that's occurred over time. But if you can get a hold of the site plan and do some field verification, that's going to help you, make sure you understand what that drainage area is. You're going to be looking at the outlet structures. What does it look like? What is it made of? Does it need maintenance? What are the sizes? What are the storm volumes or storms that are supposed to go through those? What are the local requirements? And then again, especially if we're thinking about treatment for storage, we'll want to understand how that pond is designed so we know, what we can do in terms of trading storage for water quality benefits. And just some simple calculations. Again, I think as you get further into the design phase, concept design phase, these will get more, more specific, more fine-tuned. But for just this initial planning phase or retrofit reconnaissance phase, we're just trying to narrow down the list. You'll have your load reduction, so you're going to have your drainage area estimate that you've calculated either from plan sets or from in the field or a combination of both. You'll have your loading rate, either pulled out of the CAST tool or out of map sheds or maybe some other data you have, and then you have your BMP efficiency. Stream restoration, I think you guys will get into, so we can skip that one for now. Again, here's some land use loading rates. The one just to give you an idea or a sense of how this works. So this is for sediment. This is from the TMDL using the map shed tool, which uses the AVG WLF model. And then this is from the Chesapeake Bay CAST program. So you can see the difference here. First, the map shed tool has all those different land uses. I mean, if you're looking at just these disturbed land, mixed use, mixed residential, low density, high density residential. In the CAST tool, you get two. You get impervious and pervious. That's it. But you can see the difference, obviously, here, 79 pounds on average for all those land uses for sediment. In Blair, from impervious developed, you got 1,813 pounds. So again, the difference is they've got stream bank separated here, so it's a different category, it's simulated differently, and in this model, it's all rolled together into one. That's why you can't mix them up, you can't mix match, because you won't come out with the same number. You'll give yourself a headache, and it'll be all for naught. So these are all from PA, and you can get these again for free online. But just to illustrate the differences in loading rates. What DEP is going to look for from you is a % load reduction. So they're looking for, you tell us what your current load is now, and then you come up with a list of projects that you're going to implement, and then tell us what your future load is going to be, and demonstrate that you've achieved some % load reduction. It appears that that's going to be about 5%, but we're not sure. DEP won't say one way or the other. But there will be a % load reduction, or so we're told, in the next permit cycle. So if you use one model to do current loads, you use the same model to demonstrate that you've achieved your benefit. So it doesn't matter which one you use, just be consistent so you can document that % load reduction. They don't actually care about the actual loads, it's the % load reduction, because your loads are going to be different depending on which technique you use. So keep that in mind. There's BMP efficiencies. This is the old way. This is what's in the CAST tool now. This is how it works. It just has different BMPs. So if you're doing bioretention in CD soils, you get a 25% reduction for nitrogen, 45 for phosphorus, and 55 for sediment. If you're in AB soils, it's 70, 75, and 80. So that's the sort of the old way. I think that's going to start to get phased out, right, Tom? But if you're using the CAST tool, this is what's in the documentation. The new way is to look at the sort of the classification of what type of retrofit it is. So whether it's a runoff reduction practice or a stormwater treatment practice. So runoff reduction is like bioretention, dry swales, infiltration, brittle pavement, stuff that's actually reducing runoff. So water's going into the ground and not running off. Achieve at least 25% reduction of annual runoff volume, or treatment practices, that would be your typical ponds, proprietary practices, constructed wetlands, filtering practices. So you're not actually reducing runoff volume at all, but you are providing some sort of treatment. So once you identify which one, your curve you're on the your runoff reduction or stormwater treatment curve. This one is the phosphorus curve. you figure out how much runoff depth you're capturing from your impervious acres. So in this case, it's a ½ an inch. We run it up here, and we're a little bit right around, I guess, 52% for runoff reduction practice. This is the new curves. Tom, I think, has a whole guidance document series on how to use these curves. This is sort of the new way of doing it, and will be, I think, incorporated in the next Bay model. So the first grouping I showed you was sort of how things are going, but this is how things are moving towards this direction. So you might think about using these curves to estimate how your practices are working. They have different curves. This one's for nitrogen. I showed you sediment. Again, that's the sediment again. So they have ones for different. They have one for phosphorus, one for nitrogen, and one for sediment. And you just classify your practice, how much runoff, your depth you're capturing, and that'll tell you your efficiency. So this is just, we're going to check out this site today. This is the Edgewood Drive. It didn't really show up well on here, so I'll just go ahead and do that. So you can see this is the neighborhood. We'll be visiting this shortly. Nice neighborhood. The red box is the pond, and the light blue area is the drainage area. So we got about a almost 14 acre drainage area. It's about 50% impervious cover, and it's a hydrologic soil group C. One of the things that we're thinking about here is when we're thinking about our basin retrofit is what is the volume of the practice? What does it hold now? What does it need to hold? So was it oversized? Do we have some room to work with? What are the soils? Will they infiltrate? We probably need to do some additional soil investigation to figure that out. Can we excavate? Can we convert the dry basin to an extended detention basin, or can we convert it from a dry basin to a wet pond? Those are all potential options that we considered. We think a riser modification can do a lot of that. So we think that's a possibility. So in this case, we did some initial work on this one. We were able to do some additional calculations. So this kind of show you the next level once you kind of complete your retrofit reconnaissance form. This is a site that we'll visit later, but the Soil Conservation District and others are thinking about actually doing. So we did some additional work to kind of start to calculate water quality benefits. We looked at both doing an extended detention and a wet pond. I think that some additional work needs to be done before that can ultimately be decided. But we did some initial calculations as well on load reduction. Again, the important big number that the local jurisdictions are, I mean, they're all important, but this one, there's a local TMDL for this, for sediment. So this is probably the more important one. So you can see we can get about a 7,000 pound reduction from conversion to extended detention, and almost a 9,000 pound reduction from a conversion to a wet pond. So we have a general idea where we want to go. Still need to collect some more data to determine what exactly can we do. But this was used, we used the cast tool loads into this. That's how we developed this. And then we used the adjuster curves, the curves I just showed you, to determine the load reduction percent efficiencies. So that's how we calculated those. So simple exercises, kind of just goes through it. Some other examples. 13 acre drainage area. We have our load in is 1,000 pounds. We're converting it. This is if we use the other example. We have a net 50% improvement in performance. So this sort of shows we have to discount. We do have some performance by the initial facility, so you can't just take it like there's nothing there. And then we have our load reduction. So that, in this way, you only get 514 pounds. But again, if you're looking at the percent reduction from one to the other, you just be consistent, and you look at it from a percent-wise, it won't. But if you switched up your models, you'd end up with some crazy numbers there. At this point, you developed some concepts. This is an example concept from Biohabitats for a stormwater wetland that they did. So they've got a nice little sketch that shows what they're thinking about doing. There's a profile view. Sometimes there's some pictures. and a description of what you're going to be proposing. Here's some examples that we did. This is one for a project in York County. Again, just converting, real basic, converting a swale into a bioswale. So we've got our area outlined. We have a little sketch. In this case, there's an existing stormwater pipe that we're going to patch into towards the end of the project. And that's pretty much all I have. We'll cover some more in the field for the field trip. So I'm happy to take any questions now. We obviously have plenty of time in the field to talk. If I don't have any questions? Okay. So for the field, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go up to Tyrone and to the Tyrone VFW, and that's a location where a bioretention project is going to be going in the fall. Hopefully in the fall. So we've done some initial design work. Still a little bit more to do, but we're in the process of getting that ready. So we're just going to take a quick look at that site. It's a good example of an on-site, small practice, but in a highly visible location, because not only is it the VFW, but in the future I think they're planning on having a canoe launch there. So this site was selected because it's high visibility. We're going to go not too far down the road to Bellwood Antis Park. It's a much larger park, and there what we'll do is in your package you should have a retrofit form. We're just going to go through the retrofit form, look around the park, and kind of do, well, what would you guys do? What would you think about doing in this park? You can hopefully maybe take a look at some of the things that we talked about today and look around the park for a couple minutes and to see what you think you would do. You don't have to go through the form. I mean, if you want to go through the form piece by piece, feel free. But we'll be there for just a little bit. We'll give you some time to kind of explore, look at the field form, ask questions, think about what you would do, and then we'll move on. We're going to go take a look at the Edgewood Pond. That'll be another very quick stop. We'll just take a quick look at it. We may be able to get down in the pond. I'm not sure. We can at least look at it. We'll talk about the options, what we think about it, just to give you guys an idea of what you would look at in the field. That's right nearby. We'll come back here. I have just a couple quick slides to show as to what we think is possible in those sites, and then we'll call it a day. So 3 stops, and then we'll be back here. We'll share what we think is good at the Bellwood Antis Park. We'll show our examples, and we'll call it a day. Jeff, do you want to give your briefing here or in?
Did you want to look at the holiday for YMCA site? That site is completed. It's finished. And I have costs for that.